Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Quinn Buckland, author of all the books that are on your screen right here. Today I am going to be talking about all the books that I have planned. The stuff that I'm working on, the stuff that I'm currently going through outlines, the stuff that I already have first drafts written for, and just ideas that I have. Now, before I get into this, I do need to state that this is not an entirely definitive list, mostly because titles will change, ideas will change, and sometimes projects just get dropped. So, that said, just because I mentioned something in this video does not necessarily mean that I will do it. But me saying that doesn't necessarily mean that I won't do it either. It's one of those things where I will write the books as I desire to do them and go from there. Like, I do kind of have the first 25 books that I want to do sort of planned out, and I do have every intention of doing those 25 books. Those are the ones that I feel the most confident toward, and yeah, just that sort of thing. So anyway, I should also mention that all in all, I have 43 books planned, or at least 43 ideas. There's a lot of planning and stuff like that. If something's a part of a series, I will mention what the series is, but before then, and I'll mention the book titles that I have in said series, and I will consider that as just sort of like one book or one project for the sake of this video and just for the sake of time. But anyway, let's begin. So the first stuff that I want to talk about is The Engine What Runs the World and its sequels, because this is a part of a bigger series than what I'd originally intended. I thought it was going to be one book and a sequel, so 2 books essentially. But then people got asking for, for more information on the Underground. So I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll do a prequel eventually. It won't be anytime soon, but it will be eventually. And as I was going through the sequel for this, it kind of really expanded, and it kind of now goes all around the world. So you kind of get to see what the world in and of itself looks like in the 43rd century. Is it the 42nd century? It's right there. Shouldn't have even had to guess. Anyway, so this series is officially called The Empires of a Hollow World. And as the series goes on, you'll understand why. But it goes through with The City What Rules the World as the sequel, The Army What Conquers the World, The Rebellion What Shakes the World, The Ship What Sails the World. The prequel is The Level What Controls the Underground. And then after the ship, it goes on to The Tribe What Travels the World, The Society What Powers the World, The Magic What Dooms the World, The God What Destroys the World, and The Book What Reads the World. Now, as I said before, these are all titles in development, and some of these projects might get dropped. The series might not be as big as I'm anticipating it. Essentially, I'm just giving myself room to breathe, room to actually really expand on things. If it ends up being longer than that, dear God. If it ends up being smaller than that, okay. The series is going to be as big as it needs to be. I'm not going to try and push the envelope by any definition, but this is just kind of what I have planned for that series. I'm not really going to want to get into too much as to where the series is going, mostly just because I don't personally know myself. I don't really want to know where this world is going to go, because I kind of want it to be fun for myself, if that makes any sort of sense at all. So, yeah. The Empires of a Hollow World, this is the first book, and the next release for the series will be The City What Rules the World. That is the definitive title. When I release it, I can't say. I do have the first draft written, but it's really rough. And honestly, the rebellion which shakes the world wasn't supposed to exist. That was supposed to be how the city ended, and it so basically the city what rules the world used to have a 5-year gap, and I got past the 5-year gap, and I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm writing, and I'm really just not into it because I kind of had this thing where the army what conquers the world was going to be what happens in between that 5 years, because I wanted it to kind of be its own book in and of itself. But I didn't really have quite enough for the city to be its own thing, so I kind of went on with this whole revolution that was also going to be going on. And honestly, it just really wasn't working with me. So I opted to split the two into 2 books, so I do have a lot of reworking to do with the city what rules the world. So when that book is done, then I will be doing the release for it. So anyway, that is essentially that series. The books later on, I have no idea what I'm doing with that. I know The Ship Which Sails the World is basically a pirate book, which will be a lot of fun. And yeah. The next series that I plan on doing, and it's not really the next series, it's just another series that I'm doing, is the Shadow Union Saga. This is the superheroes that, like, they're mentioned in The End of What Runs the World, and one of them makes an appearance in this, in Fallen Gods. They might have been mentioned in the 1099th briefly, but I don't really remember. And I'm pretty sure they do get a mention in Supernatural Pizza, but again, I don't really remember. If they do, it was very brief. But I do know that they're mentioned in this, and I do know that Nightchild shows up in Fallen Gods. And that is going to be a 5-book series. Now, there are going to be sort of spin-off books and stuff like that do connect to this series, but this series focuses primarily on the character of Nightchild or Ken Bach or any of the other aliases that he goes by. There's a lot of them, and there's a different outfit for each one of them. I mean, it's novel form, so I do have to describe the outfit, but, you know. But anyway, and the titles for this one I'm really not sold on, and I probably will rename them before release. But it goes into Shadows Begin, Shadows Fall, Shadow City, Shadow Cosmic, and Shadow Sky. It's got a nice style to the name with the whole shadow thing, but I don't know. I think they're kind of basic. I think they're kind of really simple, and I'm not really sold on them. I was a while back, but I'm really just not anymore. So, yeah. But this is the superhero series. It follows characters like Nightchild and the Velvet Rose, Atropos, Metapsych. All characters that you'll get to see and read about as soon as I do have these written. I do have the first drafts for Shadows Begin, Shadow Fall, and Shadow City written. I would have Shadow Cosmic and Shadow Sky finished, but I wanted to just go and do something different for a little while, and I just never picked them back up. So, yeah. Alright, let's go through some of the individual standalone books that are in the first 25 that I plan to release. The first one being Bye Lunar Lady. This one actually came to me in a dream. I remember running through the woods, and that was about it. But I kept asking, where was I running from? What was I running from? Who was I running from? Where was I? And I just kind of asked myself a whole bunch of questions, and this one just kind of formed on its own. Has absolutely very little to do with anything about the dream, but the dream is just kind of what spurred it. And it's essentially about this woman on the moon who sees something terrible happen, and she ends up trying to escape to Earth. And that's basically the story without, spoilers, obviously. This one was actually a lot of fun to write. I do have the first draft finished. It's the last one that I have where the first draft is actually finished. Sorry. The next one I want to talk about is The Devil Wears a Suit. This is one that I can't really talk about much without spoiling it. Basically, it's about this cop who gets transferred to this really small town in the middle of absolute nowhere. Like, there's no cell phone service, there's no internet service. The landline only connects to the other houses in the town. And he has to try and solve a murder without the use of anything. He isn't even really capable of calling for backup outside of the town. So, yeah. This one is going to be really fun. Fun might not be the right word for it, but it's going to be good to write this one. This is probably the most grounded book that I'm going to write that I can think of. Because this one is going to be very grounded. It is going to feel very real and very possible. So, I am going to enjoy writing that one. The next one is The Iron Gunman. This one is actually one that I started writing with a friend of mine until we both realized that us going on about this, because we have both had kind of our different characters that we were writing, and it was going to kind of be a chapter to chapter swap, but the stories went on two very different convergences, so they're going to actually end up being companion novels, essentially. So you got The Iron Gunman, which is written by me, and there's going to be The Wolf-Born Woman, which is being written by my friend Danita. This one, I want this one to be in the first 25, but it's really all dependent on when she's able to get The Wolf-Born Woman completed. Essentially, she's a mom, she has a job, she's got all these other responsibilities that I don't have to worry about, so I'm able to stay home and write all day. If I have a day off of my own job. She doesn't really have that option. She has the option of writing in little spurts here and there, so this one might take some time, but it might be sooner than I think too. So this one is one that I plan to have the first draft written next year. And hopefully she has hers done. I mean, she is much further into her project than I am, but once I get going on this, I'll probably shoot past her fairly quickly. The next one is Platypus. This is going to be my very first space opera. I know, a space opera entitled Platypus. Figure that one out. It's actually just based on several ideas that I've had, and just kind of how I want things to work. I had started writing it a while back, but I wasn't really buying the world and like the general world area in and of itself, mostly just because I went into it half-cocked and didn't really have things planned out. So when you're going on with certain ideas like death is not entirely permanent, society changes around that sort of idea. And it's not something I really went into or really explored as I was writing it. And I'm about halfway through it. And this is not going to be a little book either. Like, it's going to be fairly sizable. So I do kind of want to actually explore that idea and, why and how it's different from how we view mortality. So this one is one that I do plan to start up sooner than later, but it probably won't be too soon. The next one is The Time Behind My Eyes. This is one that I got the idea like years and years and years ago. And it's kind of based on the whole premise of, if I knew then what I know now, what would I do different? And it kind of just goes through this guy's entire life. His 30-some-year-old mind gets put into the brain of his body being born. So he's essentially got a 30-some-year-old consciousness inside a newborn, and he's going through the frustrations of growing up and not really connecting to anybody because he can't. His mind is so much more mature. And this is something, doctors are, this is something the doctors eventually pick up on, and it's something that his family picks up on because he's 30-some years old. Like, he can't connect with other children. He connects more with adults, but adults don't see him as an adult because he's a child, and he's kind of going through this entire life sort of thing, and it's one that I don't want to go into half-cocked, but it's also one that I am having a lot of trouble trying to figure it out, because I kind of want to have each chapter as an individual year of his life. So, like, chapter 0 is him being born. Chapter 1 starts at his first birthday, and so on and so forth. It's something that I really do want to write, but it's one that I need to actually get into with some actual ideas. Next up, we have Calipolis. This is one that I don't know how it'll go over in terms of the general audience. Mostly because this one's not entirely written in novel form. It is written as a series of progress reports, journal entries, and transcripts as this scientist tries to build this society that is based off of the concept where no cash exists, and there's no such thing as a trade and barter system. Everybody does things does everything based on their own culture that states that working toward the community is a benefit to not only the community but also to yourself, and it kind of just goes through a lot of stuff like that, with also some commentary on politics, the police, sex and relationships and stuff like that. It's something where I'm exploring certain aspects and stuff like that, and I do need to note that I can't go whole hog into this sort of thing in terms of like the commentary, because while the writer-verse is a really good parallel to our world, it is not a 1-to-1 ratio. Certain concepts like corporatism is not entirely a bad thing in the writer-verse, because the Legion of 12 makes it very beneficial for both the corporation and the individual and the community and the environment. Like, they work toward the benefit of everything because it looks better for the bottom line. Anyway, it's one that I'm working on, kind of. I'm kind of just quickly writing this one, and when I'm eventually ready to really get into it, I'll be adding and expanding to what I've already written. So, while that first draft is probably going to be like 30,000 words, by the time it's finished, it'll probably end up being around 50 to 60,000 words. Next up is Fucking Noobs. I love that title. I'm so proud of that title, Fucking Noobs. I don't think I'm going to actually change that one, like, even when it's released. It's I don't know how well that title will sell. Personally, I think it might sell well enough. Hard to say. I don't know. But anyway, I hate competition fiction. I genuinely hate it, and I will explain why in a different video. But essentially, what it comes down to is you already know who's going to win. It's the main character. Because if the main character's not going to win, then what the hell's the point? And even if they happen to not win, they learn some sort of lesson, or it's usually some plucky underdog story. Like, it's usually just kind of lame, or some feel-good sort of thing. This is one that follows 3 people. And it follows 3 people through pretty much the entirety of the book, so you don't actually know who's going to win. And it keeps you guessing. I don't have anything else for the story for Fucking Noobs. I have the title and I have a basic premise, and that's about as far as that one's gone so far. When I actually sit down to do it and plan it out a little bit, then I will actually have, what I want to do with it. But until then, I just get to sit here and chuckle at the idea of having a novel called Fucking Noobs. True Terror. This is one I'm not entirely sold on my title, but essentially it's about this guy who loves like Halloween haunted houses, but he doesn't find himself becoming scared of them anymore, and eventually finds himself becoming bored. And even the ones that are said to be super scary and super hard to get through, he just kind of moseys on through. He doesn't even really react anymore. This one, the true terror, is in reference to the haunted house that finally gets him. And throughout he finds himself questioning whether or not he's seeing and experiencing is actually real. Is he actually watching people die, or are they just mannequins? Is this guy chasing him with an actual chainsaw, or is it just a chainsaw without the blade to it? He doesn't know, and he's not entirely sure he wants to find out. This one will actually be a lot of fun for me to write. Sometimes horror can be really goofy and cheesy, and this is kind of what I want this one to be. I don't want this one to be super scary. I want it to be just kind of actually be like a cheesy B movie, because that's kind of what's inspiring it. But on the flip side, when it comes to horror, we have the Ides of Lamarche. This is one this is the one that I'm currently writing, because the idea just won't get the hell out of my head, so I have to write it so I can actually work on other projects. And this is one where I kind of have to go to some dark places to write it. And I'm trying to get through this one as quickly as humanly possible, so it's just done. And I don't know when I will release this one. I will release it when I'm satisfied with how the book has turned out. Because I don't release something if I think it's absolutely garbage, or if I think it's going to be bad. I might release something if I don't know what the audience reception will be. But if I have confidence in its writing and in the characters and the story, then I will release it. This one might take some time, as it will be after the Shadow Union Saga is completely released, because it does have some spoilers for later books. But this one, it's not as much fun to write, but it is one that just won't leave me alone. So I'm working on it now. Dangers of the Night. This is an idea that I had a long time ago, and it kind of centers around the idea of historical figures being supernatural creatures. You know, like you got Vlad Dracula and Elizabeth Bathory, Ivan the Terrible as vampires. You've got like Rasputin as a werewolf, and stuff like that. And this is kind of the book that gave me the certain ideas that go on in Dead Man Walking. Those who've read it will understand what I'm talking about. Those who haven't won't. But Dangers of the Night and the 5,000 words, I think, the 50 or 60,000 words that I have so far into it is a part of what really inspired this one. I do look forward to actually finishing writing Dangers of the Night and going through it and scoffing at the horrible, horrible writing that I had when I was in my early 20s. But I mean, for only 10 years ago, actually 9 years ago, I suppose, but I mean, for only 9 or 10 years ago, I've come a long way. And finally, for the final of the first 25, we have the Immortal Condition. This is one that I am really looking forward to writing, and it's one that I would have started writing a long time ago if I was actually convinced that I was a good enough writer to write this one right now. Currently, I am not good enough. I need a decent backlog of actual books to write this one. Or at the very least, to have the confidence to write this one effectively and in a way that I myself can be satisfied with how it is written. I am currently going through the outline, because this is one that I'm actually outlining. Like, I am a notorious pantser. Sometimes sometimes I'll do a little bit of a outline, but it's kind of a loose outline. It's not something I stick to religiously. The Immortal Condition is one that I will have to stick to fairly religiously because there's so much going on in it. Like, this is going to be a big book when it's done. But I mean, the story that it tells, it kind of has to be a big book. And I don't even really want to explain what it is, because I kind of want people to go into the Immortal Condition as blind as humanly possible, because, well, it's just that kind of book. It kind of just encompasses so much of what this world is at that point. And I mean, the Immortal Condition, I believe, takes place roughly around the year 2018, give or take. So I mean, there's a lot that goes on in this book, but there's a lot that goes on after this book too. But what goes on in this book kind of starts a lot of the stuff that goes on afterward too. So yeah, the Immortal Condition is going to be it's going to be a slog for me to write, but I'm going to love every moment of it. It's going to be a huge book. I'm estimating roughly 500,000 words. This is a rough estimate. It might be a little less, might be a little more, but it's not going to be little by any means. Next up is a series that I kind of concocted back when I was working on the rigs. Because at that time I was watching a lot of British comedy. I was watching like Blackadder, and I was watching Red Dwarf, and I eventually came up with this character of Angus. And just sort of these wacky and goofy characters as they go off on this huge adventure. And it was originally supposed to be a web series because I wanted it to be a web series. I wanted it to be acted, and it was going to be acted by my friends, and we were going to shoot this thing, and I had so many plans for something that I knew full well was just never going to happen, because there was no way in hell I was going to be able to get the budget for that sort of thing. Hell, I wasn't even making enough to create the budget for that sort of thing. But I had so much fun writing it, and I didn't want the idea to die. So I'm going to turn it into books. And it was going to be a 7-season series. Each one going through a different genre and just kind of exploring the tropes and cliches that go along with it, and just sort of making fun of them. So like the first season is Dungeons and Dragons based fantasy. So like they find a farmer who happens to be an old adventurer, and just so happens to have the information that they're looking for to find the item that they need. They find stuff like elves, and they find magical items that switch minds and bodies. And there's a whole chapter of a dream sequence, and there's a whole thing there. Book 2 is a western. That's about and other than like that, all I have really is like the general genres that they're spoofing, paying homage to, stuff like that. So yeah, like the book 1 is Dungeons and Dragons based fantasy. Book 2 is a western. Book 3 is horror. Book 3 is horror. Book 4 is superhero. Oh, no. Book 4 is science fiction, space opera sort of thing. Book 5 is superhero. Book 6 is a murder mystery, like those sort of Agatha Christie style murder mysteries where everyone's just kind of stuck in the house while the investigator tries to figure out what happened, which will be so much fun because I love those style of books. And then book 7 is back to fantasy, but I think I'll probably have this kind of making more fun of, say Lord of the Rings style fantasy. And that is the Angus series. 7 books. It's one that I'm really looking forward to, and honestly, after going through the Discworld books this year, I really want to write it now, but I am going to hold off on writing them because, to be perfectly honest, I have so much other stuff to write, and I kind of really want to take my time with these books to make them as good as absolutely possible, because comedy is hard. Comedy is very hard, and good comedy is even harder to write. And I want it to be good comedy. But at the same time, I want the story and the characters to be taken seriously. It's more of the situations that are comedic. So, much like the Immortal Condition, I'm just not a good enough writer to write these books yet. I will be, but just not quite yet. The next book, this is a standalone, is Penelope. As in the immortal Penelope, who is in this book, and has sort of a cameo mention in this book. I'm actually surprised I didn't put her in this one, and I didn't see a reason to put her in this one. So, I mean, she's in 3 of the 5 books that I have so far, and she's going to be in several others, but she does deserve her own book. And it's one that I've been working on for a long time. This is one that I actually originally wanted it to be a rock opera, because I really got into Paul Shapiro. I felt like I still really love Paul Shapiro's work. I really got to do that video where I explain Paul Shapiro and his work. But for now, I have the idea for Penelope. I actually know where the story is going to go with Penelope. I honestly just have to kind of give myself the base outline and write the book. I don't think it's going to be a short book, but I don't think it's going to be particularly long either. Maybe around 100,000 words. Maybe, probably, hopefully. The next one is Kingdoms of Alberta. This is an idea that I had while I was on the rigs as well, while I was watching or reading Game of Thrones. I was kind of doing both. It essentially starts after the events of once the magic era ends, and everything goes back into a bit more of a feudal state. It's not a very long period. I think it's only lasts maybe 600 years or something like that of a feudal era before technology starts to reintegrate into people's lives. But I kind of wanted to explore that feudal age of the world in general, and just go through the 3 kingdoms of Alberta, Calgary, Edmonton, and the North. And yeah, I'm not entirely I'm not sold on the idea of the North, but I don't want it to just be Edmonton and Calgary either. I do kind of want Northern Alberta to be its own thing, but I also don't want to just give that to Grand Prairie, which I believe is probably the biggest city of northern Canada, because Edmonton is central Canada, is central Alberta, and Calgary is southern Alberta. Red City is still going to just kind of be its own individual thing. It's sort of like a liaison that moves, it's sort of a liaison that moves between both Edmonton and Calgary and just kind of relays messages and stuff like that. I don't have the full story or anything like that. I just have a lot of ideas, but that's about as far as it goes. And it's one that may or may not eventually get dropped, too. It depends on how I'm feeling about it when I eventually get around to writing it, and whether or not I'm able to actually give it a good story. If not, when I eventually let other authors get into writing in the writerverse, I might let them take a stab at the whole feudal era sort of thing. Next book is 2222. This is a story that I developed when I was in college. I was reading a lot of dystopian literature at that time. I was reading 1984, Brave New World, and We by Evgeny Zamyatin, Anthem by Ayn Rand, just stuff like that, where I was really going through the whole government control sort of thing. And I kind of wanted to do this sort of thing. So eventually this guy gets cryogenically frozen. When I was in college, it was because he tried to assassinate a leader of some sort. But that sounded way too much like Demolition Man. Might have been watching Demolition Man when I thought of the idea. Possibly. I don't remember. Anyway, yeah, I've definitely changed the idea a lot since then. Like, the guy's still cryogenically frozen, but it's due to an experiment. And he's not the only one. Like, there's been a person waking up from cryogenic freezing every 10 years since the initial freezing, because they want to see the effects of cryogenic freezing and the effects of their serums and stuff like that to prevent people from dying from freezing. And yeah, it's one that I think I will get to eventually. It's an older idea, so it's one that I've kind of already put through the mental ringer, and I'm not entirely convinced whether or not I do want to write it. But at the same time, I kind of do, because, well, I've mentioned Alex Cooper in a few videos already, or in a few books already, and I think I've mentioned Alex Cooper in the podcast, and I've mentioned Alex Cooper, I think, and I actually might have mentioned Alex Cooper in a couple of videos in the past. I don't actually really know, but Alex Cooper is this huge major character, so 2222 probably does actually need to be written. I just don't know when I'm going to write it. Next book is Elemental Weapon. This one comes from back in my early 20s when I essentially tried to start a band with some friends. And we kind of had this big idea of having this huge multi-person metal band where we all dress in wacky costumes. Like, we were kind of just inspired by bands like Gwar and Lordi, but we wanted to do it more as a power metal group instead of whatever Gwar and Lordi are. I love those bands, by the way. They're so good. But we wanted to do more of a power metal sort of thing. And we were called Elemental Weapon. And we had two drummers. It was myself and my friend Tom. And we kind of used these goofy names and very, very stereotypical European-styled accents. And, like, my character was supposedly from Sweden, so I had a very stereotypical Swedish accent. Kind of probably offensive at the one that I would not dare do now, and kind of not entirely impressed that I did it then. But I didn't really know any better. It's just one of those things, you know. I'm not proud of it. But anyway, we had a lot of fun with the idea, and we had a few songs. I've actually mentioned Elemental Weapon as a band in Fallen Gods. Might have mentioned them as Supernatural Pizza, but I don't think I did. But yeah, like, Elemental Weapon is a band because the band just didn't work. We didn't actually do anything. We didn't go anywhere with it. Mostly just because very few of the members actually had any follow-through. The only people who actually practiced the music, like, at all was me and Tom, the two drummers. Nobody else really had any sort of actual practice. I even wrote a couple songs for it. Maybe eventually when I have Elemental Weapon written, I'll be able to afford to maybe do an album or something with a few of the songs, because they're so much fun. And I do plan to actually have lyrics throughout the book and stuff like that, because Elemental Weapon as a book will be basically detailing the band if it actually happened, if it actually surfaced, and if the characters were actually actually became the goofy characters that we were failing at portraying. And yeah, Elemental Weapon will be a lot of fun to write. I just need a story. And the final standalone book is Gatesholm 1873. Now, those who have been following along with my work will know that Gatesholm was the original name for Red City back in the in the early settling days. Like, Gatesholm eventually became Red Deer, which only had its name for maybe like a decade before it was eventually changed to Red City, and that's the name it kept throughout for the rest of humanity. And yeah, basically it takes place in 1873, and I think it's going to take place around a police detective or something to that effect. I haven't really hashed out any real major plans for it. It's something that was kind of inspired by the Nightwatch books from Discworld, because the character of Sam Vimes is really fascinating and just a really good character all in all. And I kind of want to write something like that, but I don't really have a story. At least nothing that's not like, say, Dead Man Walking or The Angel That Runs the World, because, you know, I already have 2 detective books. And finally, I have the Races of Ancient Magic series. And calling it a series is kind of dishonest in a sort of way, because it's not really a series. It is essentially one book, but because this book is going to be really massive, I'm splitting it up into 5 individual volumes. And the Races of Ancient Magic is just sort of the current idea that I've got going on right now. But essentially, what it is it's a build upon the oldest book idea that I've had. It is the combination of every bit of fantasy that I've ever wanted to put into a book, while also trying to subvert a lot of the fantasy tropes. But not in, say, a humorous way with the Angus series, but in an actual honest narrative sense. This is one that I do anticipate being roughly around 1 million words in total, which is why I'm splitting it into 5 volumes. Because it just makes it a bit more easily consumed by a reader. But that said, like, it's going to be a long time before I write this one. I'm going to have so many more ideas, and it's one that when I do eventually get to it, I'm going to love writing every moment of it. It's one that once I start to outline it and, you know, really start going on it, I'm just going to love every second of it, because it's going to feel like everything that I've been working towards since I first started writing is culminating and building into something absolutely fantastic. It's going to build into the story that I've always wanted to write, that 12-year-old Quinn, when he first started writing, can really be proud of. Something that he really... The book that he's always dreamed of having. The book that I've always dreamed of writing. Yes, it's going to be huge. It's going to be massive. But it's going to be worth it, and it's going to be warranted. But anyway, that's everything that I'm working on. That's everything that I have planned. That's everything that I want to do. This is the stuff that I just have out. In comparison to this, that list is massive. But to be perfectly honest, this was released in 2018, and this was released at the end of September of 2021. So I mean, 18, 19, 20, 21. My next release is going to be in December, but that's because I'm going to be focusing I'm going to actually be focusing on marketing before the release and not after the release. So whatever this book ends up being is going to be marketed. I'm going to start marketing it in probably July. So hopefully sooner than later I will have an idea as to what I want to do and where I want to go with it and how I want to do things. Actually, if I'm being perfectly honest, I know exactly what book I'm doing, but I'm just not telling anybody because, well, I kind of want the reveal in July to really be worth something. So yeah. Secret Sixth book. It's coming. It'll be out in December. I already have the release date that I want, but I'm not saying the release date just yet. All I can say is December. Actually, all I will say is December. So, yeah. That is all I've got for you, folks. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe. You know, YouTube algorithms, aren't they fun? And, well, just help support your local indie author. Honestly, every little bit really does mean something. It really does work towards something. Even if it's just liking the video or telling somebody about me, telling somebody, hey, you've read some of Quinn's books, or you've read one of Quinn's books, check these out. He's got 5 of them out now. And he's just mentioned like a whole bunch of stuff that he's working on and stuff that he's got ready and willing to go and so on and so forth. You know, you got just any little bit helps. I really do appreciate everything that a person does to help me out. But anyway, that's all I got for you folks. So thank you all so much to anybody who watches my videos or reads my books. It means so much to me. Having a good day. Words, Quinn, words.